But I wanted to move on to another interesting emerging technology trend, which is AI, and it's very much a global theme that we're seeing here, especially with regulation. When you recently wrote about it, especially with regards to cybersecurity, data privacy, all of that. And I wanted to tie it also to other cycles of regulation that we've seen over the past few years in terms of social media. I guess, the previous year with Twitter, TikTok, and then other things years back, ride hailing in Southeast Asia, for example. Having covered a lot of these cycles of regulation formation, and more recently, we've seen China and then ASEAN draw lines and that. What do you think we can expect for AI and data privacy in terms of regulation moving forward?
Okay, so let's try to go with AI regulation first. So the big move that's going on right now is lawmakers in Europe are pushing really hard or leading the world in a push to regulate AI and to make up basically what will be known as basically the AI Act. But that act, which is still basically going through the legislative process, will take years, actually specifically at least 3 years to implement. So in the meantime, the EU with the US is pushing to draft a voluntary kind of code of conduct on AI that they're hoping, according to the European Commission Vice President Margaret Vestager, could be put forward in weeks. And they want this would be like a voluntary, still pretty intense kind of AI code. And the EU officials, we literally had several senior EU officials, the senior European officials and some EU officials in Singapore recently at the Asia Tech Week, are going globally and basically lobbying for more global assistance on this. They're talking to other countries and they're really worried about the AI. The US, so the EU is pushing for regulation. The US is involved in the voluntary code talks, but if you speak to officials, they feel that this is not very accurate to the US way, where less regulation, more innovation, and they're afraid that the European way will hurt regulation. They're still involved with the EU, but it puts this kind of very unique environment where this drive for regulation and this drive for rules is happening at an unprecedented speed compared to social media, where governments started asking those questions years and years after those tools became massive in our lives. So that's a big factor in AI regulation. And then what we covered for Reuters is right now, Tian State, and this is driven by Singapore, are pushing for what's going to be called the ASEAN, I think this is cute, ASEAN Guide to AI Governance and Ethics. They're in the early drafting stage. And this would also be voluntary. And as one official warned me, this is ASEAN. It's going to take a very long time because everything needs to be by consensus. And we're not EU. I had another official tell me this is probably going to be in the spirit of the EU, but it's not going to be like the EU, and we're not copying the EU here. But it also does result in you're seeing ASEAN even before AI really, generative AI becomes a massive driver in Southeast Asia. Obviously, we're already seeing it. We're seeing startups using it, producing ASEAN itself, doing its own voluntary code, voluntary guidelines at the same time as the EU, which is new, which I've never seen happen. And for ASEAN, from what we're hearing, it should be announced in basically early next year. It's still very early in the drafting process. So that's quite interesting. And then for data privacy guideline, the new personal data protection law in Indonesia became effective in October 2022. But now what that means is getting more serious now. You are seeing a draft personal data protection decree that I believe is still pending promulgation in Vietnam, and a new decree on that does mention data privacy as part of the cybersecurity law. You're seeing data protection guidelines in Thailand, which became effective in 2021 as well. And you are seeing, I think there is an increased administrative fine of up to 10% of an organization annual turnover in Singapore if it's over 10 million under the Personal Data Protection Act that also came into effect in 2022. And you're seeing a lot of discussion on privacy law reform proposals in Malaysia as well, that on stuff like mandatory breach notification, and also discussions as well on fines on data privacy law in the Philippines. So in a different way, less as an ASEAN thing, but it does come up in ASEAN meetings. There seems to be a drive for increased regulation to protect users and to protect data privacy. I think for Southeast Asia, the question is really going to be implementation and how regulators basically
Right.
deal with this.